up from the choir he rose. With the sermon somewhere in his notes. Early on the first of the week, Mary Magdalene came to the tomb. But the tomb, it was empty, the stone had rolled away. So she wept in the cool of the day. Two angels, they said unto her, Woman, tell me, why do you weep? They have taken my Lord, and I don't know where he's laid. So I weep here in the cool of the day. Then Jesus, he says unto her, Woman, tell me, whom do you seek? She says, If you are the gardener, and you've taken him away, tell me where, and I'll take him with me. Then Jesus, he calls her by name. Mary, don't you see that it's me? She says, Teacher, if it's you, then it's too good to be true that you walk here in the cool of the day. Now is the cool of the day. Now is the cool of the day. This earth is a garden, the garden of my Lord, and God walks in this garden in the cool of the day. Then Jesus, he says unto her, Mary, don't you hold on to me, but go and tell my friends that this story never ends, for I'll return in the cool of the day. Mary ran to find them to say, I have seen the Lord there today. He is off to be with God in the garden of our Lord. But he'll return in the cool of the day. He'll return in the cool of the day. Do you know the story? Do you know the Easter story? Yes. I know, it's kind of a dumb question, right? We've just heard the story. We've heard it read so well by Pearl and Alicia. We've heard the story sung to us by the choir. And we've sung the story to each other through those hymns. Christ the Lord is risen today, and lo, in the grave he arose. So I'm sure you know the story. I know the story. Maybe everybody knows this story, the story of the life and death and resurrection of Jesus. The question I really want to ask us today, and I really want us to think about today, is this. Whose story is it? Whose story is it, this Easter story? Is it your story? Is it your story? Could it be your story? Is it somehow, in some way, becoming your story? You know, I used to assume that the Easter story was Jesus' story. That makes sense. It's his story of moving past the cruelty of the cross, overcoming the totality of the tomb, and coming into the victory of the resurrection. His story. His story. But the way the Gospels tell it, and John's Gospel in particular, it's actually Mary's story, Mary Magdalene. It's her story. It's her story. In John's version of the Easter story, Mary Magdalene is the central character. She plays the major role. I don't know if you were counting, but Mary is referred to by name or her pronouns 20 times in those 18 verses. Mary's story. It's Mary who gets up early while it's still dark outside. Mary travels to the tomb alone, by herself, braver than I would be. She goes there for one reason. She can't stay away. She can't stay away. She couldn't stay away even from the horror of the crucifixion. She was there by the cross on Good Friday, standing with the other women. And so she goes to the tomb that first Easter morning in the cool of the day, and she sees that the huge stone that had covered the tomb was rolled away. And as we just heard, it's Mary who runs for help and finds two people who, like her, were disciples of Jesus, Peter and the other disciple, the one Jesus loved, as he's always referred to. And so Mary gets them to come with her back to the tomb. And they come to the tomb, and they see what they see, but all they see is an empty tomb with the linens all neatly rolled up. I love that part. Somehow, John wants us to know that the first thing Easter morning, Jesus makes his bed. He's a perfect house guest. Or tomb guest, I guess. But Peter and the other disciple, they see those folded linens, and they believe, and they leave. But Mary doesn't see, and she doesn't know what to believe, and she still can't leave. She stays at the tomb, weeping, and it's still Mary's story. And for Mary, it's a matter of life and death. There are so many reasons to love John's account of the resurrection, but the big one is this for me. There is something so painfully and beautifully intimate about the way that story unfolds in John's gospel. When I read it, I can feel viscerally the emptiness, the desperation, the aloneness, because I've felt those things. From time to time, I still feel those things, and maybe you do too. And then for Mary, there's an angel, two angels, even better, messengers, which is what the word angel means, two divine messengers, and they ask Mary, "Why are you weeping?" It's a funny question. It's a funny question, then and now. Why shouldn't she weep? Why shouldn't she weep? Why shouldn't we weep with so much to weep about? When we hear of children dying of hunger in Gaza and Sudan, when we hear about ceaseless, senseless wars raging, and we hear about kids getting shot to death in school, trans kids bullied to death in school classrooms, school restrooms, why wouldn't we weep? With so much to weep about, why wouldn't we weep? We sometimes think of weeping as a sign of weakness, but what if it's actually a sign of strength? John's gospel describes two people who weep. One, of course, is Mary, weeping here beside the tomb. The other one, anybody? Is Jesus, weeping over his friend Lazarus, weeping with frustration and remorse and regret and sorrow. Woman, why are you weeping? Mary's weeping and wailing and crying out in grief, but also in frustration, because not only is her beloved Jesus dead, but where is he? He's not only dead, he's gone. And that's the end of Mary's story. Her story is over until it isn't. Because the story doesn't end there, does it? Because soon Mary's joined by Jesus. He's there. He's right there, standing right behind him. But she doesn't see him. When she turns, she sees a gardener. Guess that makes sense. Where is she? She's in a garden. Why wouldn't there be a gardener? She doesn't see because she knows the story is over. It was a good story, but it's over. It's over, and it ended very badly. In fear, and failure, in terror, and torture, in despair, in death. So when this gardener speaks to her and asks her why she's weeping, who is she looking for, she talks to him, she pleads with him, help me, but she doesn't know him. Of course she doesn't know him because she knows that the person that she's looking for, longing for, is dead. She knows the end of the story. And already she has turned away from this unhelpful gardener. But you and I know her story doesn't end there, because Mary doesn't know this gardener, but this gardener knows her. She doesn't know him until he calls her by her name. Mary. Mary. I don't know if that's the shortest sentence in the Bible, but I'm pretty sure it's the sweetest one. Jesus calls her by her name. And that's how she knows him. That's how she recognizes him. Knows she's not alone, and knows that maybe her story isn't over after all. So Mary turns back to Jesus and calls him Rabboni. Rabboni, my rabbi, my teacher. It's a term of affection and respect. It's a designation that requires a relationship. Rabboni. My teacher, my great teacher, my dear beloved teacher, in whatever language. It's a language of relationship and respect and mutuality, the language of love. And she sees that her story doesn't end in death, can't end there, won't end there. The relationship didn't end there in death. It's reborn in hope. So the Easter story is Mary's story. The Easter story is Mary's story, but I think it maybe is my story too. The story of my own relationship with some power beyond me, with my own connection in fits and in starts with resurrection power, with God's yes whispering over the world's no. Could it be your story? Could it be our story? A story of the triumph of life over the million death-dealing comments and policies and things that try to put us down. A story of the ability of the marginalized and ostracized and sometimes criminalized to overcome injustice. A story of the persistence of love in the face of cynicism and apathy and even hate. Is it your story? If so, it's a story to be told. It's a story to be shared. It's a story to be shouted. Like Mary, who goes back to those other disciples, wherever they're still hiding out, goes back as herself a divine messenger, an angel. She proclaims what she's seen and experienced. She proclaims that story that she's still connected to, her story, our story. You know, with the Easter story, for me, it's not so much a question of how did it happen, or is it all real, or did it happen the way I think it happened? Rather, it's a question of how we choose to connect to it. How we choose to connect to it. It's a story that is profoundly personal, and it's a matter of life and death. Because Jesus calls each of us by name. And Jesus invites each of us to connect to the story. That story of life. That story of rebirth and resurrection. We're invited to that story that doesn't end. The story is still going if we keep it going. The story doesn't end there that day. Someone rolled that stone far away, and the one who calls to Mary still calls to us today. I'll return in the cool of the day. Now is the cool of the day. Now is the cool of the day. This earth is a garden, the garden of my Lord, and God walks in this garden in the cool of the day. Now is the cool of the day. Now is the cool of the day. This earth is a garden, the garden of my Lord, and God walks in this garden in the cool